After a bomb explosion caused by terrorists on the British headquarters at Jerusalem, one entire corner of the King David Hotel, a building of 7 stories, was razed to the ground. The stone floors were cut clean.
In scenes eerily reminiscent of New York 55 years later, the Jerusalem bomb was the beginning of terrorism as a media event, designed to capture the world's attention.
The latest casualty list included 65 killed, 47 injured.
The perpetrators, Zionist Jews, members of Menachem Begin's Irgun terrorist network. Begin, who would one day become Prime Minister of Israel, described this tactic as turning Palestine into a glass house, where the entire world was looking in.
I think it was one of these acts of violence that, ahead of its time, in an era before CNN, before instantaneous news, was choreographed precisely to attract international attention.
We were a minority, but we were a minority with a clear ideology that we must have a Jewish state to rebuild the state which was existing many, many hundreds of years ago.
The bombing of the King David Hotel was perhaps one of the most significant terrorist incidents of the 20th century. For many decades, it actually held the infamous record of having killed the largest number of people.
In a fight for liberty, you have always those who are more, call them extreme, or more adamant, or call them staunch, and they want it immediately, not to wait for the Messiah.
Still lying under the shadow of terrorist attacks, many areas of Palestine are...
By the end of World War II, the British, who had been made responsible for looking after Palestine by the old League of Nations 27 years earlier, found it to be a serious headache. They were caught in the middle of the Arabs and the Jews, both of whom wanted the country for their own, were unwilling to peacefully coexist, and were agreed on only one thing: their hatred of the British, whom they both saw as foreign occupiers. The British military and administrative headquarters was here, in the south wing of the King David Hotel in Jerusalem. The luxury hotel itself still functioned with guests, restaurants, bars, and Sudanese waiters.
Jerusalem at that time, it was a fortress, and I walk through the town and put in my mind every place and think about how can we attack this place. If we succeed, it's very important the whole world will see that we can fight even the British.
Begin and Ellis decided on a daring plan. They would strike at the very heart of British rule, the King David Hotel itself. If they succeeded here, the whole world would take notice. The terrorist bomb was hidden in 7 milk churns and delivered in a hijacked pickup truck to the hotel's basement kitchen.
We jumped out and everyone took up their positions. I took the churn and started to run. I was thinking, how do I get to the place where I have to put the churn down? That's how I started. Anyway, there were lots of people around in the corridor, and we tried to move them out of the way. Here, there, to the side. But there were some who resisted, but we threatened them with our weapons. I wasn't dressed as a civilian or a soldier. I was dressed like an Arab, with a jalaba and a keffiyeh, with that ring on your head. You know, like, what's he called? The leader of the Arabs. You know, Arafat. There were 7 churns, weighing 350 kilos in all. I ran until I reached the place where I had to put it down, with the churn on my shoulder. I carried on, until I got to the place where the British people were. I saw a pillar that used to be here, and I put the churn down and ran away immediately. I waited in my position until all the churns were together, and then the time would come for the explosion. All the churns together were like one whole man, a complete bomb.
The bomb went off at 12:37 and was devastating. But of the 91 dead, only 28 were British. 17 Jews died alongside 41 Arabs. Of all these, 54 were innocent civilians, unconnected to the British authorities in any way.
It's classic terror in that it's off the mainstream. It's not a reflection of the policies of the then Israeli leadership, which had a very strong ethical approach to the use of violence, admirable in many ways. And it shows too a sign of the future in that it's the damage being done by the splinter of the main movement, which is the damage we frequently call terrorist, and which is the most likely to be without any moral dimension.
Once more, the civilized world has received a rude shock at the hands of fanatics whose wanton act is contrary to the dictates of all creeds alike and imperils the best interests of the cause that it strives to promote.
The Irgun denied that they aimed at civilian targets, but one man at least had a different opinion. In 1948, the British Chief Secretary in Palestine, Sir Henry Gurney, wrote in his diary of how one Irgun attack was indiscriminately aimed at civilian targets and was designed to create panic among the population. 3 years later, Gurney himself was to be assassinated, as liberation movements all over the world took note of the flame that had been ignited in Palestine. By 1948, the British and the world community had lost their appetite for the fight against the Jewish terrorists, and the British abandoned Palestine, leaving Arab and Jew to fight it out amongst themselves. But elsewhere in their restless colonies, others had watched and learnt from the success of the Zionist terrorists.